Drew. I'd like to welcome Libby this afternoon, Director of the Knepp Wildland Foundation, which has been set up to act as a catalyst for nature recovery across Sussex and beyond. This afternoon, Libby is going to talk to us about a project called Wheeled to Waves. This is about creating a corridor for nature and establishing a 100-mile nature recovery corridor across Sussex to connect a fragmented landscape which hopefully will boost biodiversity, capture carbon, enhance food production and enrich the rural economy. I'll hand you over to Libby. Thank you.
Is that okay? Or would you prefer no?
Great, well thank you for having me, and it's so humbling to sit and listen to all the incredible work you've done. It's one of my favourite parts of my job is talking to communities like yourselves who are so incredibly active and do so from the spirit of community engagement and care for your community, so thank you. It's been really heartening to listen to the successes and indeed share a little of the disappointments, that you're certainly not alone in many of those. So my name's Libby Drew. I am the director of the Knepp Wildland Foundation, which is a relatively new charity. Some of you may know of, and some of you may have been to the Knepp estate, which is just south of Bosham. And for those, does that sound okay?
There's some feedback. Turn them on.
Okay, I can stand back a bit if you can still hear me.
No, it's feedback from the other way.
Absolutely. Hopefully that's a little better. Great. So for those who don't know the Knepp estate, it is was a very intensively farmed part of West Sussex, one of the large estates run by the Bosham family, and until 20 years ago was an intensive dairy and arable farm. But if anyone has had a walk around there will know it sits on thick, sticky, claggy, wet clay. And if you can imagine trying to get a dairy herd through that, you have a sense of how challenging it was. It was deemed to be unproductive and indeed would have been a failed farm were it not for a few strategic conversations with the Bosham family and European conservation groups who said, maybe there's another way. Fast forward 21 years, it's one of the most prominent rewilding sites, and we'll talk about that word in a minute. And I had the pleasure of joining the family, the community at Knepp, because it's many things now. It's lots of different businesses that have emerged from that quite brave decision 20 years ago to put the farm back into nature, into ecosystem restoration. My little bit of it, which is fast growing, is the charity. It's a foundation, and there's three things up there which form the pillars of what we do. We do community engagement, so obviously you have a huge number of footfall, about 150,000 are due to come this year to Knepp, and we try and provide information, data, research, that they can understand what's happening at Knepp. We have an important element of youth engagement, so 16 to 25-year-olds who are very absent from our rural landscapes. We want to not just provide for them, but benefit from them. And we also look at landscape scale recovery. So I always say that my actual job often starts at the edge of Knepp. Knepp is doing pretty well actually in terms of the ecosystem health, but we know of course that lots of parts of Sussex is not. So what I do is look at how we connect Knepp and other biodiverse regions to one another, and indeed that's what we'll talk about today. So I'm going to try, Andy and I, hopefully, if we can get this right. Oh, Andy, you might have to ready our scheme of try to do this remotely. Let's see if we can just move that on. Is that working? Always technology. Well, whilst he's starting, so Knepp Wildland Foundation has the very privileged position to be the coordinator, you keep pressing Andy, there we go, of a wonderful project. And now when I joined, it was this that made me decide to take this job. I was given something really special, which I'll show you in a minute, which was a map, and this extraordinary challenge to reconnect the most biodiverse, rich parts of Sussex through almost contiguous corridor. And I thought, that can't be done. That sounds like something that my 9-year-old would have made up as a school project. But what an extraordinary thing to spend the rest of my career trying to do. Click on, Andy, thank you. So much of that idea emerged from the Lawton report, which some of you may not know and some of you may, but if you don't know, I highly recommend you going and finding at least an executive summary of it. It's quite long, because it was a real turning point, and one that I'm sure actually is embedded in your work, whether you've read the report or not. And that is that we need a landscape that has areas for nature that are bigger, better, and more joined up. And this bigger, better, and more joined up, though that mantra has caught light really, and has gone gallivanting across our community groups and provided us with a single mission, whether we're a tiny village or a town or district or indeed a county council. Andy, maybe if you click on, you'll see how it builds. So the idea is that yes, we've got these biodiverse islands, but they have to be connected to one another. And even those islands are in a terrible state compared to what they were several centuries ago, with that shifting baseline. So what we need is actually very simple. Once again, something my 9-year-old could have drawn, but actually is very, very difficult to achieve, where you've got these restoration areas, these core biodiverse areas, and these landscape corridors. And let's not forget those stepping stones that don't seem like they're connected, but if you are a flying insect or a bird, or indeed a kind of pretty nimble, agile scurrier, they are vital, because they provide you with respite. So carry on, Andy, thank you. So how feasible is it for us to have a bigger, better, more joined up landscape? Well, Britain today is a humanly shaped island, of course, but it sometimes surprises people how our land is used. So it doesn't maybe surprise you that much that the majority of it is farmed. We have a national average of just under 60%, and there's a slightly dubious bit of data in there that says 35% is natural land. Dig a little bit under that term and you'll find that that sort of covers all manners of sins. Green urbans, so vital if you think about those stepping stones. You've only got a little bit there, 2.5, but it does surprise people that only 6% of the country has any form of hard landscape on it at all. So that's your houses, your roads, your schools, your railways, 6%. Now this really surprised me. I grew up in central London. I thought most of the world was paved, but indeed it's not. And indeed it does change the nature of the mission, because if you're looking here, who is your primary stakeholder? Well, it's not the urbanites, it is the farmers who are farming our landscape. And Andy, if you go on one more, how does Sussex fare? Well, Sussex, even more, that is the case with the farmers, because we have got 72, and I've heard actually that revised up to some revisions to 78% of our landscape is farmed. We've got otherwise a relatively similar picture. So farmers, this is an interesting group of people, because if you are in the conservation space, of which you all are, how many of you are farmers? Hands up? No. See, so we've got a problem here, and it's one that needed to be solved relatively urgently. Now this guy is a farmer. Quite a handsome chap there, standing by his coastal farm. Now, I spent a lot of time with this guy. His name's James Baird. I know a couple of you have met him. He is a pioneer, because he is a farmer who realised that this problem of the countryside being farmed, but farmers not being involved in conservation, was a real issue, and somebody needed to put their head above the parapet. So James farms the Climping Gap, which is not too far from here, about 20 minutes drive, and is one of, a bit like the peninsula here, one of the last remnants of undeveloped coastline on the Sussex coast, gold dust. And how on earth communities have managed to protect these spaces is an extraordinary question. But here he is. He's from a long line of farmers. He's farmed ever since he was a young boy. He's been part of a farming family. And it was very traditional farming. He has the rubber stamp documents where his father was told to drain the land and to remove the hedgerows, and it was the noble cause. He was a bit of a rebel and used to sneak out the window and plant trees at night because his father didn't like messing up with his plan. But indeed, he's grown up, and those trees have grown up, and as he grew, he also started to realise he just needed to farm it, and that's what he did. But a few years ago, he went on a trip to Borneo and flew over the palm oil fields. Now, I'm sure that's not, all in your imaginations, but they go on for miles, they go on for hours. And he got very angry and decided he was going to lobby the Malaysian government about this. And then he came home and looked out his window at his monocrop arable fields and thought, eek, I'm in the same position. Maybe instead of trying to sort out the overseas, I'll look more locally. And so someone said, have you read Isabella Tree's book, Wilding? And he thought, what a load of... And then he went up to Knepp, read the book, and thought, they're on to something. And he picked up the phone and spoke to Charlie Burrell, and he said, what can I do? And he said, well, let's connect the landscape. Let's do bigger, better, and more joined up. So this was lockdown when you were only allowed a little group of people, and actually this little group of people are quite powerful. They represent some of the largest landowners and estates in Sussex, and they got together on the Clipping Beach for what was a quiet but quite radical meeting of minds, and they said, let's do this. Let's find a way of connecting our farms. Thank you, Andy. And they came up with 3 goals, which are the cause of many grey hairs of mine now, but these goals were sort of have grown, of course, but they're relatively understandable. We've got a nationally significant wildlife corridor in the making, 100 miles long, 20,000 hectares of land, and that is largely intended to be contiguous, so connected functionally, you know, in the sense that you can look at it from the sky and see that it's a line on the map. It was designed and being designed at a point where people were starting to understand ecosystem services that our water and our landscape are providing for us. This is not just our altruism, this is about protecting the future. And indeed, it had to be people-led. Thank you, Andy. So if you click on, carry on clicking on. So one of the first things that ever put this concept of bigger, better joined up as a data project was the Bug Lines project. And they mapped what pollinator routes might look like over the landscape. Now, it could have just been filed away as a little project, a nice piece of data visualization, but actually it was very radical, and it has provided, and I know that's the case here locally, has provided the understanding of how species might flow within our landscape, and critically, that the landscape is already telling us where the corridors are. The insects, the birds, the mammals, they are telling us where the corridors are and where they need to be. Thanks, Andy. So how do they interpret those wiggly pink lines? Well, they needed something a little bit more dynamic, something that would raise imaginations. And so they commissioned this map. It's a kind of shamanic map. And indeed, it's something quite beautiful, artistic, but it has galvanized people to think, yes, I can see how this might work. It is no longer a piece of paper rallying people to 20,000 hectares. It looks like that. It could look like that. Thank you. And then I got the boring job of scrubbing out all the nice bits and having to do what we call geo-referencing it. So actually making it work for each metre and mile that is on the landscape. And what we decided was the blue route in the middle was going to be the bit that really mattered, the bit that we had to make contiguous because wildlife needed to be able to move. But there would be this radiant zone, and this radiant zone would be a 5-kilometre wide route that people could move across and could volunteer and support without the need for cars, and they would be as critical as our buffer zone. If you keep clicking through. But, you know, the shamanic vision is all very nice, but this is what it really looks like with our roads. And if you click on Andy as well, we've got built up areas, and keep going. You've got light pollution, which is a real problem. People don't think about how that fragments our landscape. Bats cannot move through these areas of white. You've got roads that have noise. They're not just hard fragments, but they're noisy, and they've got the roadkill density as well, which we're mapping. And keep going. Yes, from the air it looks like we live in this green and pleasant land, but it is almost impermeable for certain animals to cross. And indeed, different species need different things. They don't all need dense hedgerows. They need open spaces as well. They need their ponds, they need dry areas, they need wet, boggy areas, they need dark, they need light. So we need a kaleidoscope of landscapes. Thank you. And a little bat there for your amusement. Carry on there. So, We plotted those farms, those committed farms, and we rattled down a few other people who were already doing quite a lot. And then what we decided was we were going to let all the riffraff in, everybody with any little bit, who weren't lords and ladies and who weren't the most, well-known landowners. And immediately, oh sorry, if you go back 1 minute, Andy. Immediately, people rushed to be part of this project. They could tell that they were as important as Knepp, that their garden, their window box, the back of their school, their green roof had a role to play. That's great, thank you. But we aren't doing this on our own, and we never were. We were never intended to be something brand new. In fact, we're an umbrella for all of these landscape projects that are happening right now, bubbling up and emerging, and some of those we're leading on and some of those we're supporting from behind. But you've got your new local lake to recovery strategy, which has been rebranded Sussex Nature Recovery. We've got the Ada River Recovery, Wilderoos, South Downs, lots of these you'll recognise. Don't forget the marine environment. We've got the whole of the kelp forest restoration off the Sussex coast, and indeed the corridor is incorporating that. It is a circular route. And you've got your protected areas. You've also got Sussex Bay, which if you don't know about is a brand new ecosystem project which takes in the whole of the Sussex Bay, run by Ada and Worthing Council. So these extraordinary projects, £50 million projects, all coming together for the first time. And your corridors, in my first day at Knepp, someone said you need to go and talk to Chichester about their corridors. You were the pioneers. I can't find a mention of corridors in Sussex before you put it on the map. And so imagine the ripple effects of you connecting these smaller elements, and how those documents that might have sat all dusty are now providing the emphasis for everybody else. Thank you, Andy. Now, farmer clusters are doing, so back to our farmers, they're doing something really interesting too. They're not just sitting around waiting for the conservationists to come to their farms. No, they are doing something radical as well. They're grouping together in these landscape projects. And so sometimes you've got 48 to 50 farms who refuse to go down to the pub together because they don't like each other, whatever, or they've never spoken to each other, or they've been in competition, but they're putting down their hatches, burying their hatches, and they're coming together, driven by concern, driven by the fact that ecosystems are now being built into our economies, and driven by the fact that they know that they are stronger together. And these are extraordinary blocks of change. They are peer-led transformation in action. Thank you. So if you think of the Wheel to Waves corridor as a mega cluster, we haven't quite worked out, we think we've got just under 400 farms in the corridor. So can you imagine if those were, yes, locally led, absolutely devolved, but working as one? That would be so extraordinary. And if you click on Andy, so how does it work? Because it all sounds very good, and I'm sure if I polled you all now, you'd all be in support. But how do you actually make that happen? And luckily, we are in the era of extraordinary technology, and my God, we're going to use it. We are making sure that we bend every tool out there so that we have something that is measurable, something that is visible, and that can be held to account. So Land App is a great partner of ours. One thing we started doing is ensuring that anybody who pledges, I would like to be in Wheel to Waves, and you have a land parcel over 5 hectares, well, we put you onto Land App, and you tell us what's on your farm right now, and the computer helps you to see what could be there to have the highest yield for biodiversity, for water quality, and for carbon. So if you don't have a clue, the computer tells you. If you know better than the computer, like many of our farmers do, you can tell it what you want to do, and it therefore creates a public record. And then once you've created your record, here's my little small holding, which I've logged, tiny little patch there, but I can create a whole environmental plan, and Andy, if you click on, you can see the touch of a button, I can share it with Wheel to Waves, and it becomes part of our corridor that can be measured. Great, thank you. And this is what it looks like. You'll be able to go in and you'll see the plans. So hopefully you'll be able to see, and you'll be able to walk through the footpath and check, is this happening? Because nobody wants greenwashing, of course. There's part of the civic engagement. That was brilliant, Ken, thank you. And what they're looking at is woodland creation. They're looking at holding water, cooling it down. We've got hot rivers, holding that sewage so that the soil can do its job and it turns into drinking water again. We're looking at flood alleviation. We're looking at biodiversity through planting, renewable energy, of course. taking those nutrient and nitrates out of the system, protecting species, amenity land and public access, and of course the wetland creation. We've lost 90% of our wetlands, so pertinent to your work here. And all of that's happening at farm level. Communities are critical as well as this. Thank you, Andy. We've got 163 parishes in the corridor, and we intend to work with every single one of them. And one day there will be committees like this in each parish. They won't necessarily be Will to Waves committee. There'll be you guys, the current committees, for whom Will to Waves is part of how you connect with the larger landscape. And it will be wonderful. We'll have community champions. We're trialling that at the moment. We've got connected colleges and schools who we have work placements and job creation for young people coming out in green skills. And we've got 3 levels of monitoring. Observer, you need no skills. It's simply about walking. Recorder, where you're using technologies, and these kind of super specialists. And they will be looking at bringing back a degree of understanding of what is in our landscape. We have a wonderfully biodiverse landscape. It's just having a really hard time. And you can see some of the species that are so loved and so easy to record by communities who do not have a PhD in ecology. They can go out and they can measure this. And on the next slide, there are some harder species who will not find their way back without help. And so we're working on, yes, the White Stork project. Many of you may have seen them at Knepp. Thriving population of a once extinct bird. Great webcam we've got at the moment where you can see them nesting. The white-tailed eagle, you may have had that over Bosham skies. And there's little things like the black-veined white Churchill's butterfly, which we'll be bringing back. Tiny things, but they are going to be sort of real signs of hope. Thanks, Andy. And gardens and green spaces, if you click on, they're so important. 10% of the corridor is gardens and green spaces. If you click forward a bit, Andy, you'll see. Keep going. So you put in your postcode and you find out, yes, you're in the core corridor. We want you so badly. You're in the radiant zone. You're still vital. And you know what? If you're not in the radiant zone, we still want you, because you want that honey pot of green dots, green and orange dots, to show where people in your community are part of the Will to Waves corridor. How wonderful. Maybe you're the new arm of the corridor. And the kind of actions people are taking, of course, understandably, are smaller but so vital. Hedgehog highways, creating beautiful kind of natural fencing rather than hard fencing, sometimes even taking fencing down completely and creating these little super blocks of gardens. You know, my first ever garden was communal in London, and it was wonderful. Why are we not doing that anymore? And then, of course, ponds. Thank you, Andy. And there, see? Immediately you return wildlife to the landscape. And if you keep going, there's your honey pot. And actually, if you zoom in, lots of those dots kind of disaggregate, and you can see that sometimes 20, 30 gardens in a community being signed up. And here they are. And what we're asking them, very similarly to the farmers, let's find out what the state of nature is in your garden. Let's photograph it. And we will be photographing these gardens over the next 20 years and also putting environmental management plans in place for gardens. And what we're asking is we've got a global goal, of course, Britain and the world, 30% for nature. Well, we're asking each garden, find out what 30% looks like in your garden, in your window box. It's so simple, but if we could tell the government we're doing it, then there's no reason why they shouldn't. And so to come to the end, one of the things we will also be looking at is green infrastructure, from the little to the large. We are looking at reconnecting wildlife across our roads, and it isn't the easiest thing to do, but it is tantalisingly close. There are mechanisms for funding this work, and to give you a sense, we have one bridge in Britain, but in France they have 19 going up this year alone at a fraction of the cost of ours. And carry on one more time. Next slide, last one. I wanted to show you something a little bit interesting. So talking about technology, it's terrifying what's happening in some ways with artificial intelligence, but if we can understand it as activists and as community members, we can harness it. I asked the AI, ChatGPT, the other night, what is a vision of the River Ada, which is one of the Elms projects I'm running? And I said to them, it needs to be rich, it needs to be messy and woolly, it needs to hold floodwater, it needs to give people access. We need to protect our most productive farm fields for food. It needs to have a future. And I asked it what to do, and this is what it came up with. So if we and ChatGPT are on the same page, I think we're going to be all right. Thank you.
Thanks
to the floor for any questions.
I just wanted to ask you about the water cooling integration at Knepp, how that's actually happening.
Great, yeah, I could talk to you for ages about water. So as well as Wheeled to Waves, and then geographically in Wheeled to Waves, is the Ada River Recovery Project, which was one of the round one ELMS pilots, which is a load of words that don't make any sense. But as part of our commitment to environmental land management as a country now, we have a new way of managing land. It's called the ELMS scheme, Environmental Land Management Scheme. And they looked at the highest level of landscape recovery. So Knepp sits at the headwaters of the Ada, and at the bottom is Shoreham, very, very busy harbour, built-up town. And somewhere in between the two, things have gone horribly wrong, of course, with water quality. Farms contributing, of course, a bit, runoff, and huge amounts of sewage outlays as well. But also, the rivers in the country have been canalised, they've been straightened, so you've got huge amounts of water coming down, it's not being held, and all the same problems as you'll be hugely mindful of. So Knepp's got one radical approach. We put beavers in. We had firstly we had two beavers who did not like each other, took one look at each other and went the opposite way. One went down at the Ada and escaped, and the other one apparently has been now called the Black Widow, is not bonded with any other beaver and is being put into purgatory somewhere in Surrey, I think. We've now got a bonded pair. They came to us as a pair and they're incredibly loved up and they're doing very well. They've had one set of kits last year and another one we're hoping this year. Now, if anyone wants to come, I'd be delighted to come and show you the beaver pen at Knepp. It is extraordinary what they've done in terms of holding water. But at the peak of that drought last summer, it was full still, and it was cool, and it was providing shade for sea trout and dragonfly, and it was extraordinary. Now, beavers are not the answer for everyone, and there is a long process for that. But what we're looking at instead is re-meandering the river through farmland, just the riparian strip, which is really hard to farm because of flood risk anyway. And we're going to try and hold through a series of muddy meanders and ponds, some deep enough so that there is that cooling effect in the summer, and be able to kind of design with water that will help to hold the sewage through natural systems, and it will also try and cool the river as we are releasing or shifting water around. It's estimated that in the middle of the summer, 3/4 of the River Ada is treated sewage. So there's a job to be done to actually try and redesign. It's an engineering task as much as anything else, but nature is the engineer, beavers are the engineers. But if we can't do that immediately, we can try and do so by working with our farmland. Yes?
Why is France able to spend so much of this money?
French. Why are they always getting away? I think a little bit is because the scale of France, the scale of the challenge, and it's not just France actually, I do a disservice. The Netherlands now, they've really got it going on with the green bridges. They've got hundreds of them. Different landscape, a bit flatter, less complex, you've got slightly bigger, rural areas. But I don't think that's any excuse. I think we're just dragging our feet, frankly. And I think what we do need, and one of the things we're looking at is a whole green infrastructure plan for Sussex. Yes, these big iconic bridges, they would be lovely. I would love to one day go back and see that we've put that in place. But there's smaller things we can do. Culverts underneath roads that will allow adders and dormice and anything that scurries and crawls really to move. We've got a job to do with the electric railway. How do we get badgers and hares and foxes back over those electrified fragmentations? Can we greenify our footbridges? Can we make darker verges and more dense? So there's the softer, less sort of glamorous bit than the big bridges. But I think we go for everything, and we're working with some really incredible engineers who, for this is their passion project. So we hope to get costs down, look at all the technologies that are out there, and I'm hoping to go over to Europe quite soon and speak with those councils and see what those costs were, and if there's an economy of scale of doing things, then we'll try and make that happen as well.
How do you get around the environment agency?
Well, we don't go, it's a bit like the bear hound, you can't go under them and you can't go over them, so you've got to go through them, haven't you? So we are going through them. In fact, what we're doing is working directly with them on the Ada River Recovery Project. They are partners. In fact, they manage the grant for the government. So we were talking about it a little bit earlier. There are some brilliant people working in the EA, and the framework is just not fit for purpose. It is an internal job to manage that framework, but in the meantime, we're hooking onto these extraordinary individuals who've compromised actually and left their jobs often in brilliant ecology and conservation to try and come and work with. Same with Southern Water. And I think it is an end of an era, or at least maybe a break in a moment, where EA have the kind of role that they have had up until now. It might be desperately destructive and sad for them to remove, but at the same time I'm seeing people stepping into that void where the EA are unable to do anything with the river Ada. The farmers are stepping up to take that mantle on, and that's quite an extraordinary transition, and I wish, you know, I wish more was being seen of that, of what they're doing.
Most fascinating, thank you very much. However, I wonder whether, as you knew you were coming to Bosham, you had thought of anything that we could do in this area.
Yeah.
I think particularly of a large housing development, which in the past, the field that it was on absorbed the rainwater. Now it comes straight down the Tunnel Avenue into my front door, and will be worse when it's concreted over. And along one side of it, it has a 6-foot deep ditch which the farmer kept immaculately, but now is totally overgrown, and even the culvert under the road has got trees growing out of each end. I've reported it to the local authority. Nothing. Can you recommend what we might do about things like that?
I absolutely hear. There's nothing more devastating than when these challenges come right to your front door. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's a story I hear again and again from communities right across the corridor and beyond. And part of the reason why I don't come in with a template is because I'm here to learn as much from you, and the conversation hopefully we'll have afterwards and have started beforehand, because this corridor is designed to be a galvanising environment, but you on the local coalface are the ones who know the solutions. That said, there are commonalities between all the communities who are in and out of the corridor, and a huge amount needs to be done to start to share the solutions and the challenges, which is something we hope to do through forums and talks and so on. On the issue of housing development, there's some whacking great housing developments happening across Sussex. Many of them on floodplains, many of them in areas which are already totally at the brink of what they can do in terms of their sewage, water, and so on. And it is hard to understand how those decisions are being made when we have the kind of commitments that we are seeing in these environmental land management plans. I like to think we're in a sticky moment where the left hand is not talking to the right hand, and that we will start to see a slightly newer approach to planning. Who knows? The jury's out on that one. In the meantime, data can be a really helpful, your friend really. So we can't at the corridor, part of this capacity, ever lobby against development, but we can provide a bank of data. And if you can't get access to it, then you can do stuff from satellite. If you've got footpaths going through those sites, getting ecologists down there very quickly to have a sense of what's on them before they get built on, even quite far into the planning process. So creating these bureaus and these data sets for these areas that are at risk is so important. You talk the language that they're talking as well. And I thought it was so poignant. Your representative who was giving the report said, if you can't stop them, and there will be ones where you just cannot stop them, then you make it the best possible development that there is. And there is some really brilliant, again in Europe, brilliant work being done on green, and you do not let them get off the hook for the rainwater and the sewage. That is their, if they have got through and they have got that commitment, that is their job. And this unfortunately becomes a civic matter to put that pressure on them. But out on the footpaths, before and after pictures, you can use wonderful satellite imagery now to see floodwaters during the floods. We put drones up, so there's some extraordinary work we can do around that, but it is slow and exhausting.
It's a fantastic large-scale proposal. It's a breath of fresh air. Is it an opportunity to make an argument to any future government for a national spatial strategy? It's got this.
Great, Dave, I like the way you're thinking.
Questions repeated because we're not hearing the questions.
Yes. Do you mind if I repeat your question? So Dick was saying that he felt it was a breath of fresh air, which is lovely to hear, to have such a large-scale strategy, and talking about whether there is a national strategic land use framework that could be applied to this. And indeed, we're doing all we can to ensure that we're in all of the right places when it comes to the national thinking. So we sit on the steering committee for the local nature recovery strategy, which is called regional, it says local, but it's regional for Sussex. We've just been selected as one of DEFRA's projects for nature, one of the first ones. So we're creeping up, ministerial visits all the time. We say we're a stone's throw from Parliament, and actually we are. Okay, maybe an hour on the train. But for landscape projects, a lot of them are in the Cairngorms, or over in wonderful, beautiful Cornwall or Wales. But this is our bit, and this is a really gnarly bit of the countryside, really heavily human. We always say if we could do it here, well, you could do it pretty much anywhere. So we are talking and thinking, not just at national, but at European level. What we do have to be careful of is, of course, it isn't a designation, because right now there's so much uncertainty that for me to get 400 farms to the table and then to be told, well, you're not allowed to ever revert to food production, you're never allowed to build anything for your grandchildren, you're never allowed to sneeze without DEFRA and the EA, for whom there is very little trust, let's be frank, say you can, that is not going to happen. What we can say is, come and be part of designing this framework. And I'm telling you, the government are looking for opportunities where the citizen communities have risen up, taken control of something, are making it work, are measuring it and providing evidence. I mean, it's exactly what they need. So if we can make this work, then I think we will shape things radically in Britain. Our template won't be the right one for Essex, it won't be the perfect one for Northumberland, but there will be these threads, and I would say they're going to be adoptable and adaptable rather than prescriptive and directive. I do think things are going to change hugely in the next few years. I might be a massive optimist, but the combination of the sheer fury of communities, the joining of farmers to this movement, the technologies at our fingertips that mean we can work so quickly with data now, and potentially a change in administration this year, I think it's going to be a really interesting few years ahead. Really do. Yes.
As we sit out, pharmacists outside the corridors,
For now. Yeah.
For now, how can I, with a terrace house and a small garden, how can I start to engage or participate in something like this?
Brilliant. So,
Repeat the question.
yes, I will. Thank you. So the question was that Bosham sitting outside of the current corridor route, how can somebody with a terraced house and a garden be part of something like this? Now, a couple of things. Firstly, I don't think it will be very long before the corridor comes down this way. We're talking with the three harbours. We've got, I don't know if I can name check them, but places like Goodwood and Westeen who are very much at the table. And there are obviously your current corridors which are being monitored as well, which would, and let's be frank, from a bird flying from Chelsea, you are part of the corridor. Yeah. So, let's not let data be the enemy of good collaboration. I would very much almost carry on as if you were, because build it and they will come and so on. That said, even if you were right at the tail end, of nowhere, in Sussex, you could still be a part of it. So we purposefully opened all pledges for everywhere in Sussex because we want people to see what's in your community. It's really heartening to be able to see that 10 of the gardens on this road are part of Wheel to Waves. What could that be? That could be something, couldn't it? It could be the beginnings of a... So do not wait. Get yourself on the map. You can sign up through a phone, through a laptop, in a library. And you can put your window box, it comes down to that level. And then what we are doing now is we've got a very vibrant newsletter which goes out with all these resources, exactly how to make a pond of different sizes, where you get free whips for new hedgerows, what you might do in terms of... And the other wonderful thing, I can't wait to get this started, is that we've just got funding for these bio boxes, which are going to be held at parish councils. And inside them is going to be all this monitoring equipment that we don't usually get our hands on as normal people. Normally the ecologists get to go and do the water testing, the soil testing, the light testing, the noise. They'll get the cards on how to do your hedgerow conditions. But you're going to be able to go and pick up a box and open it up and use the instructions to go and find out exactly the state of nature on your farm or village green. And those can be open to anyone in Sussex who wants to use them. And we've got all of the ingredients, so if a parish or a group wanted to make their own, then they know exactly what it costs and how to fundraise for it.
You said that was is it just called Land App?
You can find it all on our website, so we make it pretty easy. In fact, for garden to green spaces, you can simply just fill in a Google form and we do all the rest for you, because we know that people are time poor. And so Wheel to Waves, I'll make sure it just gets sent round to everyone afterwards. You can also have a great play on there. You can zoom in on Bosham and you can put all those different things. What is the flood risk for Bosham? It will show you. Where's your roadkill density? What does it look like for your light pollution? So you can create all these different visual maps of Bosham and how it is right now, and all the ecosystem services that are happening. And that could be very powerful if you are going to consultations, or even just want to get round a table and think about missed opportunities. Those maps are going to get richer and richer over the year, and you'll be able to really see what's happening in your locality.
Chris.
Just give some idea. Clearly, your vision at the start is like the wildlife corridor going from there to there.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and sign up farmers and gardens in that corridor. How much use is it if you signed up one farm every 3 miles along the corridor?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And how much do you get the real benefit only when everyone signed up?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, one of the great things I didn't get to say was how the route was plotted. So yes, you saw those pink bee lines that we had, but a lot of work, a year's worth of work went in to overlaying in hundreds of different data sets to see where there were biodiversity rich areas already, where species might use current vegetation. So the mapping work that's gone into that route, which means that when someone calls me up and says, I don't want to be in your corridor, take me out, and I say, I can't. Science says no. You are in the corridor. The cuckoo has flown over your gar. I can see it on the satellite tag. So you don't have to be on the map, but you're in the corridor. And they sort of, ooh. Nor can I change the corridor because somebody wants to be in it either. So that's important. It just is what it is. The landscape tells the story. But so how important it is to sign everyone up? Well, I'd like to go for 100%, of course. That's what contiguous means. But it's very, very difficult. And we certainly can't say that that's going to happen. We have no control over that. But as the Lawton principle said, we need bigger areas. So the areas that we have got on the map, well, we're making those bigger. We're making sure that they are joined up through farmer clusters so that one little biodiverse area suddenly becomes 45 farms that are all working in a catchment or in an area, that they are better. So there's a richness of work. Even at Knepp, everything needs to improve the whole time. But the more joined up bit, the bit that you're referring to is, yes, there is a human opportunity. We need to go for where people want to be a part of it because, of course, that means that they're part of the conversation. Then we've got our stepping stones, and so part of what we're doing this year is strategically working out what's the minimum gap that you could have for something to be functionally, we call it functional connectivity, that actually a tipping lot of species could move between one bit and the other. And that will be a data story. I can't tell you off the top of my head because it'll be different for different species, but let's say 3 miles, as you said. We will then look to try and target and reach out to farmers at 3 miles. What also is important to realise that not everything needs to be structurally connected to be successful. We should see a big biodiversity uplift if we get those sites connected that are already on the map. If we work on the stepping stones and if we look at the quality of the hedgerows and verges that are in between, we should start to see an uplift. Then I think that when people start to see actually this is an extraordinary thing to be part of, and that potentially it could contribute to their farm business as well, we should see people joining up.
But the issue is that if in that corridor you've got one farm that actually has the wall that stops the rats crossing over, not rats, of course, doormats.
We're cool with rats too.
Then that stops the whole thing, does it?
Well, nature always goes round the wall, as many of us will adhere to. Yes.
And it wouldn't be a corridor if
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So let's think about a corridor in many ways. So the corridor is a movement, and it's changing people. It's a mindset shift. It's a behaviour change campaign. So whether it's functionally, structurally complete, probably not for the next 50 years, but it will get there. But in the meantime, it's snowballing people's thinking. People saying, I'm meant to be in this, ringers, I'm meant to be in this damn corridor, I don't know what I've got to do. Brilliant. Let's sit down and we'll talk about what you need to do. Doesn't matter if you're miles away from the next spot, that's a success. Then yes, we are aiming towards that functional structural connectivity. Time will get us there. But I don't think you should worry if we get these horrendous sort of shocks to the system, big housing developments going up. The corridor will be built in. We can't stop that. But nature is incredibly tenacious. It will go round. And indeed, if a farm doesn't want to be a part of it, we'll go around that farm, just as the species would do. So the landscape is very yielding in that way. We just need to start being comprehensive about the way that we're tackling these barriers.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. Well, two more. Sarah and then Adrian will finish with you.
I just want to ask the advantages that farmers see from these initiatives.
Yeah. What are the advantages that people see from for the farmers for being a part of it? So it's such an important thing, because if we were still trying to make this work because of altruism, we would be looking at a very slow and very exhausting project. But we are in a period of green transition where, since Brexit, we have moved out of the common agricultural policy, and no longer are we paying farmers for simply owning land. Now we have a new mechanism, and by next year that will have completely stopped and the new system will have fully taken hold. At the moment we're in a kind of transition moment. But they know that they will only be able to trade as farmers if their soil health is improving. That is the bare basics that they have to do in order to operate as a farm. The next level up, country stewardship, well, there's a whole host of things that you could get involved in there, but critically every single thing you do has a payment attached to it. And when you get up to landscape recovery, which is what we're doing on the ADA, well, we're in an extraordinary position of building the markets as they emerge. The farmers on the ADA are actually able to shape what the price point is for holding floodwater. What an extraordinary moment in time. But the payments are getting better and better. Partly that's because of the pressure from everybody. But up until right now, nature has been an externality in our economy. We have used it to death and we've not paid for any of it. Now, that is totally changing. So what's bringing farmers to the table? Well, they are being pushed, but they're also being incentivised. So there's stick and carrot, and they're both operating very, very well. But more importantly, and I've always taken such pains to say this, we've been tricked into thinking that farmers don't care. If you want to read the media, piece of wheat out his mouth, sitting back, shooting all the hair. That's just not the way it is. Farmers love the landscape that they're farming. They know it intimately, and they have been asked by our governments for decades to do the very things which now we see as so demonic, the draining of the fields and the hedgerows. But it was to feed the population. Now they're being asked to do things differently. They're being asked to be multi-service providers. Food, yes, but water quality, air, carbon, biodiversity. We have to bear with them whilst they learn, often age 60 plus, how to suddenly be the providers of these services for which there are no rule books, there is no current economy or market or accountability. We have to be working with them, and we have to be applauding the actual job that they're doing. So if we can give them the visibility, the confidence, the advocacy, if we can go as volunteer capacity, if we can support the many hats that you'll bring from your business lives and your home lives, and say, we're here, come on, then I really think we'll see even more of a surge in local, when they realise that their cultural identities are not being eroded, that the communities are with them. Yeah?
Adrian, last question.
Thank you. I was going to try and close the circle from Chris. I'm Adrian Moss, I'm leader of Chichester District Council, and you're one of your district councillors, and Libby and I have communicated communicated quite a bit in the last year. Just to give residents here an idea of what the district council is doing that will bring us focus on Wheel to the Waves. We will be writing over the next few months a new biodiversity strategy, and built into that is talk about the project that Libby's just presented, but also we're having to consider the harbour and the chalk streams and a whole range of other things. We'll be bringing some of that forward over the next few weeks and months. We've got some projects that we'll be bringing to Cabinet in April that will help bring that on. But the biodiversity strategy that we will produce will start to pull together some of the issues and questions that actually make sure that we can link into the Wheel to the Waves. I've already been speaking to Goodwood about the project. I've also been speaking to Barlavington Estate. Both of those estates are in our district and therefore really important to the conversations we have. And we will be taking up, I hope we've had an invitation to go up and meet with Libby, and we'll take some councillors and some officers up there in due course once we're ready, so that we can enable everybody to become really part of that project. Because it's really important, I think, to Bosham that we link the harbour through the actual wildlife corridors back into the South Downs National Park and into the Wheel to the Waves project. I think it's really critical to us here, particularly because we've got the high growth development and other developments going on, because actually you've got to make sure that the wildlife can move between the harbour. And so you can be sure that we will do that. And what I will do is, once we've had got some items coming to Cabinet in April, I will give you a report of how that will help impact what you can all do, because you'll get some, I think, some positive outcomes from that.
That's fantastic, thank you. Wonderful.
Great, thanks very much, Adrian. That, I think, really brings home to us what they're doing at district level. We can do, everyone can do something, Libby tells us, even if it's just in a box on the windowsill. Can I ask everyone to show their appreciation for an absolutely fascinating talk?